a pleasure to be able to join with Dr. Michi and Dr. Kim. As introduced, I'm Professor James Minnich. I've located my comments today by identifying three focal points. Could you go to the next slide, please? The U.S.'s joint objectives for trilateral cooperation, the rationale of a trilateral relationship vis-a-vis the DPRK, and the options for trilateral security cooperation. Next slide, please. So what are the U.S. joint objectives for trilateral cooperation? Sungmin had noted that since his inauguration, President Biden has now only met twice in-person summits. In early April, he met with Japanese Prime Minister Suga, and last week he met with Korean President Moon. You know, of note, trilateral cooperation was addressed in both joint statements from these two summits. In last Friday's summit, Presidents Biden and Moon agreed to these four joint objectives for trilateral cooperation: to address the DPRK, to protect shared security and prosperity, to uphold common values, and to bolster rules-based order. In last month's summit with Japan, the two leaders jointly agreed that trilateral cooperation was essential to shared security and prosperity. Now, over the next few minutes, I'd like to consider trilateral defense cooperation regarding North Korea. Next slide, please. So what is the rationale vis-a-vis the DPRK nuclear threat? Well, 30 plus years ago, Washington and Seoul began to rightly object to Pyongyang's burgeoning pursuit of nuclear weapons. But back then, Pyongyang had no nuclear weapons capability. 15 years ago, in fact, North Korea had yet to conduct its first nuclear detonation. Then over an 11-year period between 2006 and 2017, Pyongyang conducted 6 nuclear detonations. However, really up until 2016, just a few years ago, Pyongyang's nuclear detonations were low yields, and it had yet to demonstrate missile delivery capability greater than short range. In the last 5 years or so, Pyongyang has now conducted some 70 missile tests, advancing technical and operational capabilities of much of its known inventory of ballistic missiles, including short-range ballistic missiles that can reach throughout Korea, medium-range ballistic missiles that can range Japan, intermediate-range ballistic missiles that can range forces in Guam, and intercontinental ballistic missiles that can range to the U.S. Eastern Seaboard and, frankly, beyond that. Estimates peg North Korea's growing nuclear weapons stockpile at between 30 to 60 warheads, with fissile material for upward of 100 weapons. Since 2017, Pyongyang has also had a promising second strike nuclear capability with solid fuel road mobile launchers and nascent nuclear weapons capable of submarine technology. Nearly 5 years ago, North Korea conducted its 6th nuclear detonation with an estimated yield of 250 kilotons, or 17 times more powerful than the 15 kiloton weapon dropped on Hiroshima by the United States. Next. So we ask ourselves, why does this matter? Well, the arguments are many, as much is at stake with Pyongyang's possession of nuclear weapons. Risks include a weakened non-nuclear proliferation treaty, proliferation of nuclear weapons and technology, worsened relations, existential threats, conflict escalation, and preventative war and nuclear strikes. In October 2017, Dr. Peter Pry of the Commission to Assess the Threat to the United States from an Electromagnetic Pulse Attack testified before Congress that the nation faced a potentially imminent and existential threat of nuclear EMP attack from North Korea. The Commission postulated that a high-altitude EMP detonated over the U.S. mainland would bring down the U.S. electrical grid, producing cascading calamities that could result in the death of upward of 90% of all Americans within 1 year. That's 300 million people. And if it could be done over the U.S. mainland, then why not South Korea or Japan? Or frankly, why not all three? I prepared a short video clip of Dr. Pry's testimony that we'll take a look at. Next.
What we do know is that North Korea has the capability to make an EMP attack right now, and does right now constitute an existential threat to the United States. They detonated a hydrogen bomb on September 2nd. The new estimated yield on it is 250 kilotons. That single weapon could put an EMP field down over not just the United States, but all of North America. That would cause the collapse of electric grids, transportation, communications, all the life-sustaining critical infrastructures. And it wouldn't be a temporary blackout either. It would take, we might not never recover from it.
So I'll tell you, that's pretty stark. We might not never recover from it. So you ask yourself, how did U.S. officials react to Dr. Pry's testimony there in October of 17? Rachel Maddow had offered insight on Defense Secretary Mattis's concerns about the prospect of a North Korean nuclear strike on the U.S. I want to listen to a short portion of her show. Next.
Reports on concerns that the U.S. may have come close to nuclear war with North Korea amid provocations in 2017. It was so serious that Defense Secretary James Mattis slept in his clothes to be ready in case there was a North Korean launch. He repeatedly went to the Washington National Cathedral to pray for the country.
Okay, stark. Next. So we ask ourselves, what are the options for trilateral security cooperation? For consideration and perhaps even follow-on discussion, I suggest 4 categories of needed assurances and dissuasions. And while each is offered as an option, there's synergy and necessity in implementing all 4. The first is U.S. credible extended deterrence, by which we mean that Seoul and Tokyo both need to be assured of Washington's resolve to their respective national defense, and that Pyongyang is concurrently dissuaded from an armed attack against either country. The growth and maturation of Pyongyang's nuclear weapon capability challenges confidence in extended deterrence in the first place, and the allied consultative mechanisms in the second place. Trilateral planning and consultation mechanisms is the second need. So what is needed here is the establishment of routine structural meetings that are supported by working level meetings, vice the usual meetings of convenience and crisis that typically occur on the sides of other meetings, like the recent Trilateral Foreign Ministers meeting on the side of the G7 Foreign Ministers meeting that convened earlier this month, or a potential defense ministers meeting early next month on the sides of the Shangri-La dialogue. Or similarly, Biden, Suga, and Moon may possibly meet in mid-June on the sides of the 47th G7 summit in Geneva. So, as is readily evident, each of these trilateral meetings is subject to the conveniences of availability and desirability rather than priority and regularity. Furthermore, while not a novel idea, recently the Chicago Council on Global Affairs recommended that the U.S. create an Asian version of NATO's nuclear planning group by including Japan, Korea, and Australia. Now, doing so would provide a relevant platform for these allies to discuss and consult policies and forces that are associated with providing extended nuclear deterrence, which is, after all, foundational to their national security. The third option is a trilateral interoperability, which some may recall was recently presented by experts at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. The operative word here is interoperability, which is not synonymous with interaction. Interoperability, as defined in NATO's Allied Joint Doctrine, is about the ability of forces to operate together, coherently, effectively, and efficiently. Multilateral interoperability then has 3 dimensions: human, procedural, and technical. Operational art is the act of employing forces to achieve strategic and operational objectives. Human interoperability plays prominent in operational art, which is not purely a mechanistic process. Advancing sustained trilateral education and training should be pursued to establish and retain familiarization and operability. Doctrine is a common language of defense and essential to procedural interoperability. At the strategic level, commanders apply a common approach to military operations as tactical and operational units operate together. This is clearly needed in rear area support functions, non-combatant evacuation operations, casualty evacuations, resupply, and on and on. The ability for different technology systems and software to communicate is quintessential to technical interoperability, which is often achievable through an interface technology. But this should be addressed long before a crisis develops. The fourth option is bilateral mechanisms, agreements and processes. The principle is that absent a formal trilateral alliance, bilateral agreements and processes are foundational to interoperability. Familiar international agreements include GSOMIA, or the General Security of Military Information Agreement, and AXA, the Acquisition and Cross-Servicing Agreement. Now, Japan and Korea have bilaterally agreed to the former, but not yet the latter. But frankly, both are needed. Bilateral processes might include establishing a COP, or a common operational picture, to achieve common situational awareness and facilitate collaborative planning and combined operations. So in conclusion, I suggest that bygone are the years when North Korea represented only a localized threat to the Korean Peninsula. That former condition perhaps then obviated an urgency for trilateral security cooperation. Some of you know that I encourage a policy of denuclearization through peace to establish robust, friendly relations with Pyongyang, an approach that I believe could be implemented during a single presidential administration, and which could eliminate North Korea's nuclear weapons and associated programs in a generation. Now, we've been a generation and a half or so working at it, so a generation may not seem so long. However, Pyongyang's most probable future is not that. Absent such active intervention, what we can expect is that Pyongyang will be a credible nuclearized enemy state that militarily threatens Washington and its allies while propagating global disorder, hence an urgency for robust trilateral security cooperation. Thank you for your attention.